Madam Speaker, I'm so pleased to second and speak to my honourable colleagues' long overdue Bill C-320, an act to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, or the Truth in Sentencing Bill. Unlike many of the bills we're dealing with at the moment, this one is simple. Yet, I believe it will have one of the greatest positive impacts on the way that we treat victims of crime in our country. It would add some simple amendments to the Corrections and Conditional Release Act. Any time that a change is made to a parole date, temporary absence, or work release, an explanation of how those dates were determined must be disclosed to the victims of the offence. At the core of this bill is transparency. Canada's justice system ensures that victims and their families, through no choice of their own, are drawn into arduous and protracted legal proceedings. Of course, these are necessary to ensure that every letter of the law is followed to avoid any possible miscarriage of justice. They are subjected to the facts of the case many, many times over, and when a sentence is delivered, it may not align with what was originally sought. It can be a very traumatic experience, in other words, from start to finish, and indeed for years that follow. The least we can do for Canadians who are impacted by crime is to be consistently transparent with how decisions after sentencing are made. Speaker, victims of crime are in dire need of a change of direction. We increasingly see that this government is determined to place the rights of perpetrators ahead of those of the victims. We've seen this playing out in real time through a sharp increase in random attacks and a record number of law enforcement killed in the line of duty since September of last year. Since this Prime Minister took office, violent crime has increased by 32%, and gang killings have gone up by 92%. 8 years of this government's catch and release bail policies have unleashed a wave of crime across our country. Many Canadians no longer feel safe walking down the street or taking transit. But even in its attempt to respond to Canada's collective outage on their soft on crime policies, the government refuses to reverse them. Though its so-called bail reform bill, the accused killer of OPP Constable Greg Pershella and countless other repeat violent offenders would still be released on bail. Canadians, and above all, the victims of these crimes, know that that's unacceptable. Meanwhile, this government continues to place much of the burden of rural policing on rural communities. In my part of the country, the government's retroactive pay deal for the RCMP was negotiated without consultation with the government of Saskatchewan or rural communities themselves, who are now on the hook for the entire pay increase. And I want to stress, this is not about in any way wanting to deny our RCMP the pay increases that they've received. But local mayors and councillors are being left to explain these unfair and unexpected costs to my constituents. Since these municipalities cannot run deficits, their taxes have to go up. Added to this, the federal government has chosen to stay silent on whether it will do its part. That, too, is very unacceptable. It's another example of their fail to act and ask questions later approach to public safety. All this to say, Speaker, we've seen a dramatic shift over the past 8 years away from a victim-centred approach to criminal justice. This bill is an excellent attempt to fill just one of the many gaps that we now see. I'd like to thank my colleague for responding to real-world deficiencies with a common-sense solution. In fact, I understand that this is truly a grassroots bill and that the motivation came from the experience of one of this member's own constituents. Lisa Freeman's father, Roland Slingerland, was brutally bludgeoned to death in 1991. In 92, the killer was sentenced to life in prison, or at least that's what Canadians were told. Lisa was caught off guard when her father's killer was made eligible for early parole 20 years into his 25-year life sentence. She was left with no information as to how that decision was made. On top of that, Lisa and her family now live with the reality that her father's killer enjoys the use of his own car, access to employment, and catered meals at a halfway house. That would be enough of an insult to most Canadians, but most law-abiding citizens don't live that well, and this individual, who committed a serious murder, did. But recently, he was transferred to an institution in Alberta because the program that he wanted wasn't available in Ontario. The Alberta facility is located just 10 kilometers from Lisa's sister, I have nowhere to put this, Madam Speaker. It makes absolutely no sense, regardless of what that particular criminal wanted in his opportunities to become better, that they would put him that close to her sister. That's right, their father's killer was relocated just a few minutes away without their consent or even their prior knowledge that this was going to happen. Lisa, her sister, and the rest of the Freeman family were informed of the transfer 24 hours after the fact. In other words, no opportunity to have any input into this decision. They were simply told, this is what's happening. It's safe to say that they feel betrayed and left behind by our justice system. This bill would mean that there would be no delay in the sharing of critical information with victims of crime. Like Lisa Freeman, when it comes to an offender's movements or relocation, it would provide the information victims need when preparing an impact statement for parole hearings. We heard tonight about the case with Paul Bernardo, and so I'm not going to go into that one again, but it certainly is an example of a horrific situation where those that are the victims in this crime situation face such a difficult circumstance that they really shouldn't. Michael White, just today on the CTV News, was reported that convicted killer Michael White has been granted full parole. In 2006, White was convicted of the second-degree murder of his pregnant wife, Leanna White, with no possibility of parole for 17 years. I think many Canadians expect that a minimum sentence for a second-degree murder would be fully served behind bars, but that's not the reality, it seems, in this case. And I haven't had a chance to talk to Leanne's mother, as this story just hit the airwaves this afternoon, but I'd be very interested to know how often she and her family were consulted before each decision to release Michael White into society was made. Madam Speaker, what victims experience is a lack of clarity and transparency from our justice system on how significant changes to an individual's passage through the prison system are determined. Speaker, unless we have been in their shoes, I don't think we can fully appreciate how traumatic these unexpected changes can be. I don't think we can properly measure the toll that it takes on families who are essentially re-traumatized each time a decision is made with unclear parameters. So, this bill is the least that we can do for victims and their families, and I urge the House to give victims some peace of mind by passing C-320. Thank you, Madam Speaker.